Okay, so I'm going to be doing this in stages because it's already 1 o'clock in the afternoon and tamales take all day. So today what I'm going to start is the meat, and I'm going to get my red chili sauce that's going to go into the meat later once the meat's finished cooking. I'm going to cook this meat 8 hours on low in my crock pot. It's a pork shoulder with bone in, so I'm going to save that bone for later. We can do a bone broth with it. But I am going to trim off the excess fat. There's a big fat layer here. When I'm making tamales and I'm going through the meat shredding it, I try to take out as much as those little fat pockets that I can. Nobody likes that. So I'm going to trim off this excess fat. I'm going to get it in my crock pot, cook it low and slow. I'm going to add about 2.5 cups water with it and a cut up onion just in some chunks. So I'll have an onion in here, some water, and my whole pork shoulder. That's what we're gonna do. Now, once your pork is done cooking, you're gonna wanna save all of the juices that are left over from that pork. So do not discard that pork, the pork broth that's left over, because we're gonna use that in combination with our red chili sauce. A little bit about my family. Way before I was born, my great-grandmother had 12 children, my grandma being the oldest. She's awesome. Her name is Olga. And at my great-grandma's house, every December, mid-December, we would get together and make tamales at her house. My great-grandma had all 12 children in that house. She gave birth to all 12 children in San Antonio. And it's just a 2-bedroom home. I have a ton of cousins, ton of family, and I love it. My great-grandma's side of the family originated from Saltillo, Mexico. So, if you're interested in looking that up, it's actually a mountainous region of Mexico. That's where part of my family came from. And the tradition of tamales comes from her. Now, my Aunt Mary, my great Aunt Mary, she's the one who normally prepares everything, the masa, the meat. She gets everything prepared for everyone, and we all show up and we just pitch in and do. So she keeps her recipe very close to the vest. I don't know that she's ever shared her tamale recipe, but I've paid attention and over the years and learned how to do it. And obviously I was helping in the kitchen when I was little, and so I've picked up on a thing or two, and now I make my own tamales. And I'm going to share my recipe with you. The thing about tamales, though, is that there's no one way. I'm sure that people will argue with me about that, but there's different seasonings, there's different ways to do them, different ethnicities, nationalities, they do them different ways with different ingredients. Puerto Ricans do them a certain way, tamales, there's a wide variety of different cultures that do them differently. So I'm just going to show you the way that I do them, and we can compare and talk about it. Alright, so I've cut a bunch of that fat pad off, and now I'm just going to take this whole big thing, plop it in my crock pot. Just like that. Seed it down good. I'm just going to take my white onion, or yellow onion, and get that skin off that outer layer. I'm just going to cut this up into 4 quarters. Tuck those in there. Take my 2.5 cups of water. That's it. That's all I'm going to do for the pork. I'm going to let this simmer until 8 or 9 o'clock tonight. All right, today's day 2. I am in my snow gear, so you'll have to excuse my outfit for today. I've been in and out, feeding the chickens, refilling the bird feeders, taking care of outside stuff. But now I'm inside, and I am going to start my red chili sauce for my tamales. The red chili sauce is going to go into my pork that I cooked all day yesterday. I'm going to shred that up today, and I'm going to start my chili sauce, and I'm going to reserve some of this chili sauce for my masa because I like a little bit of the masa to have some flavor in it and not just plain corn masa. So to start, I'm going to be using 2 different types of chilies today. I've got chili pasilla pods and the New Mexico chili pods. They're both dried chilies. What I want to do is take these out, and I'm going to cut off the stems. I'm going to open them up, and I'm going to de-seed them, and I'm going to lay them flat on a baking sheet. And then I've got my oven preheating right now to 350 degrees. I'm going to heat these up for a couple minutes, maybe like 3 or 4 minutes, just until you get like an aroma going, and that releases some of those natural flavors and oils within the pod. And then I'm going to cover them with hot water and let them soak for a while. After that, I'm going to blend it up. So I've got these, and then I'm also going to use some garlic, and in a little bit we're going to make almost like a roux, a thickening agent with some flour and some oil. And I also have, you don't have to use this, but I'm going to because I had some left over in my garden, a few onions that I'm going to roast with my chili pods. Alright, so I'm just going to take some clean scissors and cut them open down the side. Okay. Real quick, about these chilies, they're not hot chilies. They're a mild, almost have like a sweet, you know, like if you could think of like a bell pepper or something, but they're not super spicy. They just have a really good flavor, like a deep, rich flavor. So just keep that in mind. If you do want spicy, there's spicy peppers out there, but these are not those. Okay, so I've got my chilies here, and now I'm going to put in just some garlic pieces. And I'm also going to, I have just a few little pieces of onion from my garden. I'm going to cut that up. Okay, this is going to go in the oven for about 3 or 4 minutes. Okay, so while the chilies are in the oven, I'm going to go ahead and get my pork out and start shredding it and putting it in a separate bowl. Don't discard the broth. We need the broth. Here's my bone. I'm going to save this for a good soup. Okay, it's been just about 3 minutes, and I'm just getting this subtle sweetness to these peppers, and I'm going to put them in a bowl, and then I'm going to cover them with boiling water and let them soak in the boiling water to get them all soft. That way I can blend them. Okay, this is done with hot boiling water, and I'm going to pour this over my peppers. Just need enough to submerge them, and if they're floating, you can put something heavy like a glass plate or something to weigh it down. So I'm going to do that. Then let them soak for about 30 minutes or until the water cools off, and then we'll blend it. And in the meantime, I'm just shredding this pork. I am shredding it by hand. I do have these. You can use something like this to shred it as well, or a fork. But I'm shredding mine by hand because I'm finding a lot of fat pockets within the meat, and if you shred it with something like a fork or another utensil, you won't really be able to feel those. So I'm actually pulling that extra fat out, because when you take a bite of a tamale and you get like a big chunk of fat, it's not good. So and when I am shredding it, I'm shredding them and pulling them into like bite-sized pieces, so they're not like long stringy pieces within your tamale.
Behind me I have my big brew kettle, and I'm going to put in, it's half full of warm water. I'm going to put 2 bags of corn husks in there and let them soak. I need to break them up better instead of just throwing them in there in the big pile. I need to actually separate them out pretty good so that all the water gets in between the layers of the corn husk. So I'm just kind of pulling them apart now, separating them out, making sure we don't have any clumps that do not get soaked with water. Okay. Now, oops, I want the bag. Now we'll weigh them down again.
Okay, for this, I've got all of my pork shredded up, and I'm going to take what's left of my broth here from cooking it, and I'm going to just strain it and save it in this other bowl. Now, if you have not been able to tell by now, you're going to need a lot of bowls and appliances, and there's going to be some dishes to do, but it'll be worth it. So I've got my blender out, and I am now going to take my chilies out of the hot water and put them in my blender. Also, my pieces of garlic and my small pieces of onion. Got all that in there, and now I'm going to take about 2.5 cups of this soaking water that has now turned a nice reddish brown, and I'm going to add it to my blender, and I'm going to blend this all up. Okay. But before I blend it, I'm also going to add about 2 teaspoons of cumin and a teaspoon of salt. Alright, so we have blended for about 30 seconds all of the chilies with that 2.5 cups of the soaking fluid. So we've got our red sauce base. Alright, this step, we're over here at the stove. Here I have my bucket of lard. You can use shortening or oil, anything to make like a roux, but traditionally, for me anyway, you use lard. So I'm going to use this lard, and you can also skip this step entirely. You can just simmer your red sauce on the stove for a few hours until it reduces into like a thicker consistency, but this is fine too if you want to do it this way. I'm just gonna take, I don't know, I'm gonna eyeball it like a rounded scoop of lard and get this kind of reduced down in my saucepan. You're going to want to keep this out because we're going to use the same lard to mix up our masa. My lard has completely melted, so now I'm going to add in the same amount, a large scoop, a rounded scoop of flour. I'm just using all-purpose flour. You do not want the flour to burn, so I'm just going to stir this around in the oil, get it all incorporated. I'm just going to cook this down for just a little bit to get the flour taste cooked out of it. And again, what this is going to do is it's going to create a thickening agent for our red sauce. And that is what a traditional roux purpose is. Like a gumbo, soups that, I don't know, I use a roux for several different types of soups. But again, if you're gluten-free and you want to skip this step because it's got flour, skip the step. Just put your chili sauce in a saucepan like this and you can cook it down on low. I'm going to go ahead and add in my red sauce. Oh, it smells so good. I'm just stirring this all in well to incorporate it. And it's already starting to thicken up with the help of that flour and lard. I've turned this on medium-low just to get it a good simmer. I'm going to set this to the side. This is what we're looking like. Looks like almost like a thick spaghetti sauce. So I've got my pork here and my red sauce here. Now if this is too thick for your liking, you can use some of that leftover soaking water, or you can even use some of this broth to thin it down if you like. But reserve at least a cup for the masa if you want your masa to have a little bit of flavor instead of just plain corn masa. I'm going to reserve some of this, probably like a cup and a half. But now I'm going to take this and I'm going to pour it over my pork. And just give this a good mix. And then I'm going to let this actually sit. I'm going to cover it and let it sit because I don't want it to dry out. I want it to have a good juicy flavor to it. I don't want dry pork. So I'm going to mix this all really well. And then I'm going to cover it and let it sit while I make my masa, my corn base for my tamales. The thing is, you don't want it soupy. If you put really, really wet, soupy pork in your tamale, in your masa, it's going to take longer for that masa to set up while it's steaming. And it can be real mushy and get the masa real wet. So you don't want it dry and you don't want it super wet. You just want the meat to be coated well. Right now would be a really good time to taste test the meat because if you need to add in salt or any other spices, you can do that. But once you put them in the tamale, it's a little late to add in any more flavor. So once I get this all stirred, I'm going to do a taste test. All right, let's try some of this meat. I think I'm going to add more red sauce and some salt. And maybe a touch of this broth. Get a little bit. Remember, the only salt that we added was in the red sauce, and it was just a teaspoon, so. Okay, I'm gonna add just a little bit more broth. Because I'm sure it's gonna be soaking in, and I'm gonna cover it and start working on my masa. One thing I'll add while I'm covering this up is that this meat, you can freeze this now at this stage if you'd like. You could freeze it as soon as you shred it if you don't want to add in the sauce. But this will keep in your freezer, like a deep freezer, 4 to 6 months if stored properly. And you could use it for tacos. Any leftover meat I've had in the past, I've used it for like scrambled eggs, like mix it in with breakfast, breakfast tacos, pulled pork sandwiches with a Mexican twist. So anyway, you can stop right here and freeze it, or if you can freeze extra, yeah. So don't let any of it go to waste. I'm gonna set this aside. Okay, so I have put about 1.5 pounds of lard into this crock pot. The same crock pot I used earlier for my pork. I rinsed it out, gave it a good wash, and now I'm gonna put my MASA in here. I am going to need to whip this until it's light and fluffy. Then I'm gonna add some baking powder and some salt, and I'm gonna start slowly incorporating my MASA, my dried corn. Scrape the sides down. Okay, now I'm gonna add in my baking powder and my salt. And do 2 teaspoons baking powder. 2 teaspoons salt. I'm gonna hand mix this up first so it doesn't go flying everywhere, and then I'll get my stand mixer back in here. So I'm using this based on a 4-pound bag of this MASA mix, okay? So this is a 4-pound, 6-ounce bag of MASA. So I'm going to open this up. I'm not gonna add it all in at once. I'm gonna add just probably 1/3 of the bag. Hand mix it a little bit. I'm gonna add in a cup of my broth. It's okay if that fat layer gets in there. We're using lard after all. Then I'm gonna come use my extra red sauce, and I'm gonna add in a scoop of this red sauce. I'm gonna do this until all of this MASA is used. Now what you're looking for is almost like a peanut butter or hummus consistency. We want it spreadable, not super thin and not super thick. Here's where you can use your hands and really get in there and break everything up. This is where my Aunt Mary really gets in there. I'm about to as well. Just getting that initial stir going on. I really feel like if you use your hands when you cook, as long as they're clean, you really get to know consistencies better and the feeling and the texture. Here we go. Now remember, this is going to be super lard heavy at first because we used all of the lard that we need and whipped it in this bowl, but it's going to be dispersed throughout as we combine the rest of the ingredients. So this is what it's looking like right now. Very sticky. All right. So I'm gonna try to work all this off my fingers as much as I can so I can dump in another pour from this bag. Everything's about to be so, everything I touch is about to be messy. Now you might be asking, can you do this without using lard? And the answer to that is maybe, probably, I guess. I've never done that. I'm assuming you could probably substitute it with some sort of other oil. I just don't know. I don't know. I've never done it. I've never seen it done for maybe like a vegetarian type style tamale, but we traditionally have always used pork fat, so or beef fat. Also, this is takes a lot of upper body strength to knead this masa, to get it all incorporated. All right, now let's pour in the last of it. Once you get this well incorporated and it's not super dry and crumbly, you can turn all of this out into a clean surface, and it's easier to mix into a big ball, because at the end you're going to want this one big giant blob of dough. So that's what I'm going to do here in just a second once I get everything kind of combined. I'm going to finish kneading it on the counter. I'm also gauging like the dryness of the masa, and for me, I think I'm going to add in a little bit more of my broth as I go, because this is not, like, again, I want it to get to a peanut buttery or hummus type consistency, and if it's too crumbly, like as it's coming together like a dry dough, but I want it a little bit more spreadable than this. I've added a little bit of the broth to my pot that I had all this chili in. Just swirling it around in this pot so I can get every little bit of this red sauce for flavor in my masa. Okay, for the remaining part, I'm just gonna dump this out on my counter and continue to mix it. As you can see, it's still pretty crumbly because of the bottom layer wasn't getting mixed in that bowl. So now I'm gonna just keep mixing this and adding a little bit of broth as I go. I'm gonna make myself a little bit of a well here in the middle, and just slowly add in a 1/4 cup at a time. I know I won't have to do arm day for a while. I am teaching Alora right now about making masa. I ran out of all of my pork broth, and we're almost there. We're almost getting there. We're getting pretty close. But I am adding in a little bit of chicken broth. I also have beef broth. Either one of those is fine. You could even add in water. I don't recommend it just because there's no added flavor in that. So I'm adding in some chicken broth just until I get it to the consistency that I want. Alora, oh, you have a little piece. Yeah. So you feel that? You feel yours, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. So what I'm doing is I am mixing this dough I'm slowly adding in a little bit of liquid at a time. And
What kind?
Huh?
What kind of liquid?
Well, this had, you know, remember that big crock pot I was making the pork in?
Yeah.
I added in all of that liquid. Yeah, I added in all of that liquid that was left over. And then when I ran out of that, I'm adding in some chicken broth to this to make it, because what I need to get it to, you know what peanut butter is, how that consistency is. I'm gonna add it to where it's almost like peanut butter. See, this is still kind of crumbly. How it's,
My piece.
it's still a little crumbly. It's falling apart on the edges. We want to make sure that it's all combined.
Like flat part, like right here.
Yeah. And we're just mixing, mixing, mixing. And I'm basically kneading it now, turning it onto itself. Smells like tamale, yeah. And this masa is orange because, like I told you earlier, you can see, I don't know if you can see it in this one, but it's got a little bit of a red fleck, and that is from the red peppers, the extra red pepper sauce.
I knew it.
Mm-hmm. We're getting close. Are you gonna help me make the tamales?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Because I'm gonna need help, because my forearms, woo, I'm getting a workout. I've been working with this masa for a while now, and I believe I have it to the consistency that I want it. I've been using this scraping tool just to keep it all together, because once it starts to get super moist and like wet with all of the broth, it gets really sticky. And we want it to be like a spreadable, peanut buttery type consistency, which we're just about there. I put it back in my crock pot bowl, and now I'm going to cover it because I don't want it to dry out. I've been working for an hour to get it to where it's at. And if you have a stand mixer that's big enough to do your batches like this, my bowl is not big enough. My stand mixer bowl is not large enough to do a 5-pound masa batch. So I had to knead and mix this by hand, which takes a very long time, and your arms will get sore. So I have mixed this. I'm gonna move it on over to my workstation. Kind of a cool thing that you can get for tamales, which my grandma Olga, she gifted this to me many years ago because I was using a different kind of pot, and this one's more modern and easier to use when you're steaming tamales. And it is, if you can see this little indent here, so the water can stay below and not have your tamales soaking in the water. Otherwise, you have to build your own platform, and this just makes it easier. So what I'm gonna do when I get ready to start my tamales is I'm actually gonna create a little bit of a ball of foil in the middle so that they can lean up against it, and then I'm gonna go in a circle and have them just piled on top of one another in a circle, and then I'm gonna steam them on my stove. You can also do it outside, like on a propane burner if you have a bigger pot, but I can do this on my stove. And kind of depending on your batch size, but you can steam them for about 2 to 3 hours. So I normally check them around the 1.5 hour mark and just see where they're at. And then if they need more time, we'll give them more time. So, and another trick that you can do is called the penny trick that I've heard other people do it. I've not done it, but you could put a penny at the bottom, and if you hear it rattling, you know you need to add more water. But I just peek on them every once in a while, and you can hear it also through this pan. So I'm gonna be using this pot today that my grandma got me. All right, so I have my assembly station here. I've got my masa, my meat. I have a colander or strainer sitting on top of a cookie sheet. You're gonna need a couple cookie sheets or baking sheets. I've got this one here and another one here, and Get some paper towels ready so you don't have to get up and go, you know, move and keep getting up. Get yourself a drink because you're going to be here for a while. So I've got my pot over here with my corn husks in them. They've been soaking for a while now. And I'm just going to give them a kind of a quick turnover, get them kind of moving around in here. Make sure that they're all getting nice and soaked. And I'm going to take a bunch, like I'm going to take a handful of them, strain them out like this, get off some of that excess water, and I'm just going to put them in this colander here, and I'm just going to have them setting right here so they're drained. They're starting to drain off that extra moisture. Now, your corn husk is going to have a rough side and a smooth side. Sometimes it's hard to tell depending on the husk, but most of the time you can feel it and there's a slight difference. You're going to want to use the smooth side for your masa, to spread your masa. The rough side is going to be harder to get the masa off whenever it's cooked. Sometimes your masa will stick to it in little strips, you got to pull it off, but it'll slide off better so that you can eat it when it's on the smooth side of the corn husk. So what I do is I'm just going to lay it flat in my hand like this. Take this wrapper off of my masa, and I'm only going to expose some of it because I want to make sure that a lot of moisture doesn't escape my masa and have it dry out. I'm going to use a spoon, like one of the bigger tablespoons that you have, and just take some on a spoon and you're just going to spread it on. And then I'm just going to take the back of the spoon and start spreading it thinly on my corn husk. Now again, if your masa is not wet enough, it's not going to spread like peanut butter. Okay, we really want it to have that kind of peanut buttery consistency. And you can make this as thick or as thin as you'd like. I typically like to make them pretty thin, just so it's not super masa heavy, but to each their own. Okay, so my masa is probably going to be about, I don't know, 5 inches, like that. However long you put your masa out, that's as long as your tamale is going to be. I normally do them about to my fingertips where I'm holding the corn husk like that. I'm just going to spread it out, and I'll come show the camera so you know what I'm talking about, because I know you're far away. And I just want to make sure that the corn husk is completely covered and that there's not any bare spots for the masa. I'm going to do this one because normally I wouldn't do the meat right now. I would just do a bunch of these and stack them and cover them with a wet paper towel so they don't dry up. I would stack a bunch of these because at Grandma's house that's what you do. You pick a station, and you don't really pick a station. The ants tell you where you're going, where the help is needed, right? So you're either in the masa spreading station, the meat filling station, the folding station, but I'm doing it all today. So normally what I would do is I would make a bunch of these and stack them on top of each other, and then when I've got a good amount, then I'll start doing the meat. And then I'll roll them and I'll put them all on this cookie sheet, and then once this is filled up, I'll start doing them again. And I'll do that until I have enough to fill this pot. Once I have enough to fill the pot, I'll stop. I'll start the pot going on the stove so that they're getting cooking while I come back and do more. So it's kind of like, and when you have more people and more hands, it's easier to have all this going at once. And you've got multiple pots or a huge pot going, but I'm doing a manageable amount right here. And so I'm going to get this, I'll do this one for you guys so you can see one kind of start to finish as far as the assembly goes. So I've got this right here, and now I'm just going to take with my hands a pinch of meat, and I'm going to pinch some out of here and put it here in the middle, just straight down a line of my tamale. Okay? So I've got my line down the middle of my meat, and I'm going to take this and I'm just going to wrap it up put the two sides together like that. Just give it a good little smash so that the masa's together. And it's not this slow normally. You normally can make it go faster. And then this excess, I'm just gonna roll it onto itself like that. And then this tail part, I'm gonna tuck it underneath. Alright, so I have filled this pot up just below this little indent line. And I've got some foil here. I'm going to ball this up like this. I'm going to put this down in the pot. Kind of flatten it a little bit. And it's just going to give me something that I can start to stack my tamales around. So that they're not just flopping down. And before I start putting my tamales in here, I'm actually going to take some of the extra smaller pieces of the corn husks that I can't use, that are too small or I've ripped up. And I'm going to put just a layer down on the bottom for my tamales, just so that the steam comes through those and that the water doesn't bubble up through the little holes and get the water soak the tamales. This ball out. I'm just gonna put a couple down in here. And I don't know exactly how many I'm gonna be able to fit in this pot, but this is what I'm working with right now. So for the first couple, you're gonna have to probably hold it so that they're, before we can get them going, the first couple layers, so they don't fall. As I was going, and I was able to shove in 50. There's 50 tamales in here. Now, before I put the lid on, I'm going to take some of these corn husks, and I'm going to, the extra ones like I had, and I'm going to just cover the tops of them. And that's just going to help retain that steam. And while this is cooking, like I said, I'm gonna steam these for maybe like an hour and a half, and then let them pull one out, let it sit for a little bit, because as soon as you pull it out, if you try to unwrap it, it's gonna be kind of mushy. It needs to kind of set. So I'm gonna pull one out, let it set, see if it's good, and firm, cooked through. And if it's not, I'll give it another 30 minutes and I'll try another one. But I normally start testing them around the hour and a half mark. So these will start, and then I'll continue to work on making more of these until all of my ingredients are done. It's been about an hour and 45 minutes. And earlier I took one out around when the hour and 30 minute mark. I took one out and I set it and I let it cool off. Because initially when you look at them in the pot, they are going to look mushy, like they're not done yet. But you need to take one out and let it sit and kind of cool off and solidify a little bit, and then you'll be able to tell if they're done yet. And I did that, and they are done, and I ate it off camera, and it was really good. So now I'm gonna go in and just take my tongs and remove each one and just lay them out here so that they can start to cool off. I'll add in more water and then I'll start the next batch. I did want to add a couple things that I forgot to mention earlier. The thicker the masa, so the thicker that corn base, the longer time you'll need to steam the tamales, because the meat is already cooked, so it's not cooking the meat per se, but it is steaming the masa and cooking the masa. So if you have a really thick masa, you're gonna need a longer steam time. So you can cook these up to 2.5 hours, but I take mine out around 1.5 hours because I do a thin masa and test it. And then if it still hasn't set up, or if it's still kind of gummy, then I'll add in more time. But the hour and 30 minute mark was perfect for mine. They set up really nice. And so by the time that one cooled off to where I could eat it, it was about 1 hour and 45 minutes, but it's totally fine to let them go a little bit longer if you need to, but just keep that in mind. And then also, secondly, we talked about the corn husks on top keeping in the steam, but another thing the corn husks do while they're on top is when that condensation builds on the lid, sometimes it drips, right? It'll drip down, and we don't want a whole bunch of water and moisture dripping back down into the openings of the tamales. So that corn husk barrier on top, and then the lid, so you know, you've got your tamales, the corn husk barrier, and then the lid, that all that condensation will fall on the corn husks and then fall down to the side of the pot and not necessarily drip down into the center of the tamales. Another thing to keep in mind is when you use a pot like this, make sure that you fill it with a good amount of water at the very beginning, because there's no way to refill it. If you run out of water midway through your steam, there's no easy way to pour water in here when you've got them packed full of tamales. So you want to make sure that you've got a good amount of water in there so you don't run out.
On the Denman homestead, where the sun sets golden in the west, we live in harmony with nature, doing what we love best. From the garden to the kitchen, and the bees inside their hive. On the Denman homestead, come along and plant, nourish, thrive.